At 2:14 local time, the first warning did not come from the bridge. It came from deep inside the destroyer in the Combat Information Center, where a watchstander leaned toward a screen suddenly alive with movement and said the words everyone in the room understood at once. Multiple fast contacts bearing 086. Outside, the sea was pitch black. No moon, no horizon. Only the faint glow of instrument lights reflecting across steel consoles and the steady vibration of gas turbines driving a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer through contested waters at a controlled pace. On the bridge, the officer of the deck kept his eyes forward. Below, on the tactical net, voices stayed short, level, and disciplined. No one spoke louder. No one had to. The first sign was not visual, it was electronic. A sharp burst of emissions struck the ship's receivers from the northeast, followed by a second, stronger sweep from farther down the coastline. The pattern did not match civilian traffic. It did not look like random clutter. In CIC, the electronic warfare supervisor turned slightly and confirmed what everyone was already starting to realize. They were not scanning the water. They were locking onto the ship. The destroyer had been moving under a strict transit posture, alert but outwardly calm, one gray hull in a sea of darkness. To anyone watching from a distance, it may have looked isolated, manageable, an easy opportunity. Somewhere beyond that black horizon, an Iranian crew had made a decision. They had identified a radar contact they thought they understood, and they had gotten it wrong. The tactical action officer gave the next order without hesitation. Set defense condition, maintain course, build the picture. In an instant, the ship changed character. Watertight doors sealed. Internal communications shifted from routine traffic to combat brevity. On the bridge, lookouts strained into darkness that revealed nothing. Below, track symbols multiplied across the displays as operators pulled data from every sensor available. Surface search, air search, signal intercept, infrared cueing. No wasted motion, no repeated questions. The crew had done this before, in drills, in simulations, in the long and unforgiving repetition that turns real-world decisions into seconds instead of minutes. Another report came in. Fast surface group, now firm. 3 contacts, high speed, converging. 3 small signatures slicing across the water. Not merchant traffic, not fishing boats. Their geometry was too clean, too deliberate. They were driving inward from spread positions, narrowing the angle as if they expected hesitation from the ship ahead. They were not going to get it. The captain entered CIC quietly. No dramatic entrance, no speech. He looked once at the display wall, listened for 6 seconds, and asked the only question that mattered. Hostile intent? The answer came from 3 stations almost at once. Targeting behavior consistent. Surface group accelerating. Possible fire control activity. Possible, not confirmed, not enough, not yet. The destroyer held its discipline. That was the part outsiders rarely understood about ships like this. A U.S. Navy warship did not lose composure when the screen filled up. It became colder, sharper, more exact. Fear did not disappear. It was compressed into procedure. Up on the flight deck, a helicopter detachment moved under dim red lighting, preparing an MH-60 Seahawk for possible launch. Tie-down crews checked fittings more by touch than by sight. The rotor blades were still folded, but not for long if the order came. Forward, gun crews were already at their stations. The close-in weapon system remained silent for the moment, its white housing aimed off the starboard bow like a machine waiting for a signal to wake. At 2:16, the picture darkened further. A new signal appeared, brief and narrow, the kind that makes trained operators sit a little straighter. This was no longer just surveillance. It looked like queuing, a handoff, one platform detecting, another preparing to act. The air defense coordinator spoke into the net. Possible missile support activity. No one in CIC reacted outwardly, but the tension in the room tightened. On the bridge, the destroyer adjusted course just enough to complicate a firing solution while preserving the appearance of steady transit. It was a subtle move, barely noticeable to an untrained eye. Inside the ship, it marked a shift from observation to tactical shaping. They were no longer simply being watched. They were beginning to force the encounter onto their terms. Then came visual contact. A lookout spotted the first intermittent white streak low over the water off the starboard side. Not a missile. Not yet. Just wake. Fast wake. Then another. Then another. Farther apart, but closing. Surprise? Darkness? Numbers? They still believed they were closing on the right kind of ship. In CIC, one of the younger operators followed the lead contact as it tightened its angle again, this time with the unmistakable shape of an attack run. His cursor held over the symbol for half a second before he reported, steady but quick. Lead surface track showing attack profile. The captain did not blink. Stand by. The order settled over the room like steel. No wasted motion. No one looked away from a screen. The destroyer kept driving through the dark, its bow rising and falling with the low swell. Every system was fully active now. Every weapon was ready, waiting for lawful confirmation. Somewhere ahead, Iranian crews were closing in, convinced they had found something exposed in the night. What they had actually found was a warship built for exactly this kind of moment. At 2:17 local time, the first hostile launch warning hit the net. At 2:18, it came across the circuit with the kind of clarity that erased the last of the doubt. Possible launch, starboard sector. No one in Combat Information Center asked for it to be repeated. By then, the room had already moved past concern and into combat. What changed was not the ship's posture, but the certainty, legal and tactical, of what was unfolding. The uncertain behavior from minutes earlier was no longer uncertain at all. The vessels racing in from the darkness were not testing. They were committing. On the main display, the lead Iranian fast attack craft shifted just enough to open a firing lane. Another contact widened off its port side, likely trying to force the destroyer's sensors to divide attention across multiple approach angles. It was a familiar method. Small, fast, low-profile platforms pressing in under darkness, hoping speed and confusion could achieve what raw force alone could not. Against an unprepared ship, that might have worked. Against this one, it was a serious miscalculation. The tactical action officer leaned over his console as the electronic warfare team sharpened the picture. Another burst of emissions rippled across the receivers, short, aggressive, and tied to the same sector where the surface contacts had compressed their geometry. Whether it was targeting support, missile queuing, or a coordinated attack handoff, inside CIC it meant the same thing. The destroyer was no longer just being tracked, it was being engaged. Track all three, the captain ordered. Weapons tight until confirmed hostile. No wasted shots. That discipline mattered. It always did. In the noise, speed, and pressure of a nighttime surface engagement, the line between fear and control came down to procedure, followed exactly. Everyone in the room understood the principle without needing to hear it said aloud. The ship would not prevail by reacting faster. It would prevail by reacting correctly. On the bridge, the officer of the deck made another small course change, just enough to complicate the attack geometry while keeping the ship's movement steady and deliberate. The destroyer did not turn away in panic. It angled for advantage. Below deck, fire control teams were already assigning solutions, checking firing arcs, and preparing layered responses designed for exactly this kind of compressed threat window. Then another voice cut through the net, sharper than before. Low contact, high speed, bearing 091. The symbol flashed onto the screen and pushed closer to the ship's outer defensive envelope. Whether it was a missile, a rocket-assisted round, or a drone skimming the darkness, it was moving fast enough to demand an immediate decision. The tactical action officer did not hesitate. Recommend engage. The captain answered at once. Engage. The order moved through the destroyer like current through wire. Forward systems came alive. Fire control radars locked on. Defensive interceptors were committed in CIC. The Air Defense Coordinator called bearing, speed, and closure, while operators watched for secondary threats already forming behind the first. The ship's response was not one dramatic burst. It was a sequence. Detect, classify, assign, engage, reassess. Executed in seconds by a crew that had trained until the process became instinct. Outside, the night split open. A defensive launch climbed hard from the ship, burning bright against the black horizon before vanishing into the darkness ahead. Seconds later, another followed. On the bridge, the flash reflected across armored surfaces and bridge glass, then disappeared just as quickly, leaving darkness behind and the unmistakable fact that the destroyer was now fully in the fight. Splash possible. Stand by for confirmation. No one relaxed. A first intercept never ended the danger. It only revealed the shape of it. One contact broke apart on the scope. Another remained. One of the Iranian craft had kept coming, using the chaos of the opening exchange to push deeper into effective range. Its speed increased, its heading sharpened. The men aboard that vessel either did not understand what they were charging toward, or they understood too late and came on anyway. The destroyer answered with another layer. Soft kill systems activated first. Electronic countermeasures reached outward to distort the attack chain, break lock, confuse seekers, and inject doubt into whatever guidance was now trying to ride toward the ship. Hard kill systems remained ready behind them, the next steel barrier waiting behind the first. On the weather decks, crewmen stayed low and braced as the ship drove through its own disturbed air and spray. The close-in weapon system shifted a few degrees and held there. It was no longer dormant, it was fully awake. At 2:19, confirmation came in. First inbound neutralized. The room absorbed it without celebration, because almost immediately another report followed. Additional contacts accelerating. Surface group not disengaging. That was the moment the mistake on the Iranian side became impossible to miss. If the attacking crews believed they were closing in on a lightly protected support vessel, this should have been the moment reality caught up with them. A soft target doesn't launch layered defenses out of total darkness. A soft target doesn't absorb the first strike and instantly rebuild the tactical picture. A soft target doesn't keep maneuvering under pressure with this level of precision. And yet, the Iranian craft kept pushing forward. The captain studied the display for a brief silent moment, then gave the next command. Assume follow-on attack. Rebuild the picture. Find the next shooter. Inside CIC, no one needed a push. They were already fully engaged, already focused, already anticipating what would come next. The first wave had failed, but the water around the destroyer wasn't calming down. It was becoming more dangerous. Beyond the fading debris of the intercepted threat, a second attack vector was taking shape. And this time, the Iranians were no longer engaging a ship they misunderstood. They were facing a U.S. Navy warship that was now fully awake. At 2:20 local time, the destroyer was no longer reacting to a developing situation. It was operating inside an active fight. Additional contacts accelerating, surface group not disengaging. The report came through CIC in the same controlled tone as every other call that night, but by now the meaning was clear. The first inbound threat had been stopped. The attacking craft had seen the defensive response. They had watched the darkness ahead erupt with intercept fire, and still chose to continue. That decision changed everything. The captain stood behind the tactical action officer, eyes locked on the display as the combat picture shifted second by second. 3 Iranian fast attack craft still formed the core of the threat, but their formation had changed. One had moved wider to starboard, another cut tighter toward the destroyer's projected path, pressing harder as if trying to force a close-range opportunity before the ship's defenses could fully reset. The third remained farther back, likely acting as support or backup. Prioritize lead and trailing support, the captain said. Watch the center craft for sudden launch. Up on the bridge, the destroyer held steady. Not static, but controlled. Every movement was deliberate, every adjustment calculated for effect. It didn't turn sharply, it didn't waste speed. It shifted just enough to disrupt the attack geometry while preserving its own advantage. That was the difference between a ship reacting and a warship in control. At 2:21, another alert flashed across the net. New low contact bearing 088, closing fast. This one came in lower than the first, buried deeper in the clutter, using sea skimming altitude and darkness to compress reaction time. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to narrow around that single track. Fire control solutions updated, threat priorities reshuffled, defensive layers reassigned in real time. Recommend immediate hard kill, approved, engage. The response was nearly instant. A second interceptor launched with sharp precision, climbing out of the darkness before leveling into the threat corridor ahead. Inside CIC, the Air Defense Coordinator called out the closing geometry in short, precise bursts. 30 seconds, 26, tracking, 22. No one spoke unless necessary. No wasted words. At this stage, talking didn't improve outcomes. Execution did. Outside, the sea gave the first physical sign of how close the threat had come. Off the starboard bow, a sudden burst of white spray rose into the darkness. Not from impact with the hull, but from debris and shock striking the water at high speed. Something had been stopped, very close. The pressure wave rolled across the surface and reached the ship moments later. Not enough to cause damage, but enough for sailors topside to feel it through steel decks and railings. In CIC, confirmation followed. Second inbound destroyed. Again, no celebration. Because at that same moment, the lead Iranian craft used the distraction to push in harder. Lead surface track increasing speed, possible weapons alignment. Recommend warning threshold crossed. The captain didn't hesitate. Mark hostile intent confirmed. That sentence changed the engagement completely. Until now, the destroyer had been operating under uncertainty, maintaining strict discipline while defending itself. Now, the uncertainty was gone. A confirmed hostile attacker was inside the engagement zone. The combat system adjusted immediately. Target priorities shifted from broad defense to direct action against identified threats. The lead fast attack craft, now fully committed, was tracked with exact precision. Speed, heading, angle, and potential weapons range updated constantly. It was no longer just another contact. It was the next problem. Above, the flight deck team completed final preparations on the MH-60 Seahawk. Rotor blades unfolded into position. The helicopter didn't launch yet, but it stood ready. Another set of eyes, another layer of awareness beyond the darkness surrounding the ship. Forward gun crews remained locked in. Close-in systems tracked automatically, ready for anything that slipped through. At 2:21, the attack craft made its move. The contact shifted 2 degrees, then 4, then tightened further across the ship's bow. In CIC, one operator recognized it immediately. He's setting for a firing lane. The tactical action officer responded without delay. Engage hostile surface track. The order was direct, final, no extra words. What followed was not chaos, it was sequence. The destroyer's systems responded with the same controlled efficiency that had defined every action that night. Sensors fixed, solutions held, engagement executed. On the display, the lead craft's symbol jerked, slowed, and then broke apart as the track lost coherence. Whether disabled, forced into evasive action, or stopped outright, its attack run was finished. The formation collapsed. But the situation wasn't over. The trailing Iranian craft suddenly changed course, not retreating, but cutting across, trying to exploit the disruption caused by the lead vessel's defeat. For a few seconds, the fight became a contest of adaptation. Could they still create enough confusion, enough pressure, enough movement to slip something through before the destroyer regained full control? They could not. By now, the American ship wasn't just defending, it was reading the entire fight. Electronic warfare teams were analyzing emissions in real time. Surface operators were predicting movement patterns. Fire control teams were no longer reacting. They were anticipating. The captain watched as the tactical picture stabilized into a new shape. And for the first time since 214, the advantage was clearly shifting. The Iranian crews had entered the engagement believing darkness was on their side. Now the darkness belonged to the destroyer. As the broken remains of the lead attack disappeared into the black water, the surviving hostile craft began to do something they had not done all night. They started to lose their nerve. At 2:22 local time, the destroyer detected the first real fracture in the attack. Not in the water, not in the air, in the behavior of the men still coming at her. At first, it was subtle, nothing an untrained eye would catch. But inside the Combat Information Center, where hesitation showed up as small angle changes, slight drops in speed, and formations coming apart, the pattern stood out almost immediately. Trailing contact reducing speed, outer contact drifting wider, lead hostile profile no longer coherent. The captain kept his eyes on the display. He had seen enough operations, enough drills, enough long nights at sea to recognize the moment when an attack stopped being coordinated and started becoming reactive. The first inbound threat had been stopped. The second had gone down close to the ship. The lead fast attack craft had lost its run. Now the remaining Iranian crews were no longer controlling the pace of the fight. They were being forced to live inside the destroyer's timeline. That was where ambushes failed. "Rebuild the picture," the captain said. "No assumptions. I want every contact accounted for." The order mattered because one of the most dangerous moments in any engagement comes right after apparent success. A ship can survive the first strike, disrupt the second, damage the lead attacker, and still lose everything by relaxing too soon. The destroyer did not make that mistake. Every console remained active. Every operator stayed locked in. Threat rings, firing arcs, signal intercepts, and maneuver forecasts kept updating as the combat team widened its view beyond the immediate kill zone. Then the horizon began to change. Not with dawn, it was still far too dark for that. The shift came from above the ship, aft of the flight deck, where the first turn of rotor blades cut into the night air. Under dim red lighting, the MH-60 Seahawk came fully alive. The aircraft had waited through the opening phase of the attack, held back until the ship had stabilized the most immediate danger. Now with the surface picture loosening and the destroyer regaining control, the captain had another option. Launch the helo. On the flight deck, the signal moved fast. Final checks, hand signals under red lights, blade arc building speed. Then the helicopter lifted free of the deck and climbed into black air over black water, banking toward the threat sector with sensors ready and its crew stepping instantly into the same fight the destroyer had already been fighting for 7 relentless minutes. Inside CIC, the effect was immediate. Airborne sensor now on station, extending visual and infrared coverage. Outer surface contact acquired. The destroyer was no longer limited to what the attacking craft chose to reveal. Now the ship could see farther, classify faster, and apply pressure from above as well as ahead. The trap Iran had tried to build in darkness was beginning to reverse. One of the remaining Iranian craft swung sharply to port, its wake widening as it abandoned the tighter approach line it had held only moments earlier. Another turn just enough to suggest uncertainty without fully committing to withdrawal. That kind of half-decision was dangerous. A boat that was running could still fire. A boat that was hesitating could still become a shooter. The destroyer treated both the same way. Active threats until proven otherwise. Heavy wake on outer contact, possible egress. Do not assume retreat. That was the tone across the ship now. Controlled, suspicious, exact, no triumph, no early relief. The destroyer had survived the first strike, but survival was not the goal. Control was. From above, the Seahawk crew began feeding back the first complete visual confirmations of the hostile formation. 3 fast craft had opened the attack. 1 was no longer maneuvering effectively. The remaining 2 were separating, no longer holding mutual support spacing, no longer showing the clean, coordinated geometry that had defined their first approach. Their confidence had collapsed before their hulls ever vanished into the dark. The captain listened to the reports and made the next move without drama. Shadow them, maintain pressure, no overextension. It was a very American response at sea. Not reckless pursuit, not emotional retaliation. Control through position, sensors, and unmistakable readiness. The destroyer held course with deliberate authority, while the Seahawk orbited beyond, watching every turn, every wake, every abrupt course change from the boats that only minutes earlier had come charging in under the assumption of surprise. Now those same crews had to look up. The helicopter was on them. Its infrared system picked out hull heat against cold water. Its crew tracked every maneuver in real time. Its presence alone changed the psychology of the encounter. The Iranian boats were no longer moving toward an uncertain contact in the dark. They were moving under observation, identified, recorded, and held inside the reach of a U.S. Navy combat system that had already broken their opening attack. Then came the radio hail. Brief, unclear, carrying the unmistakable edge of uncertainty that only appears after a plan has failed. Not a confident challenge, not a hard warning, just a transmission, late and unstable, from men who now understood that the ship ahead of them was not what they thought it was. CIC logged it. No one answered emotionally. No one needed to. At 2:24, the center Iranian craft finally made the decision the others had already begun to drift toward. Center contact turning away. A second later, outer contact now in full withdrawal profile. That didn't end the danger, but it changed its direction. The attack was over. The escape had begun. The captain took one more look at the tactical display, then gave the order that defined the next phase of the night. Continue, Shadow. Continue documentation. I want every move recorded, because the men who had come out of the darkness were no longer trying to strike the destroyer. Now they were trying to get away before more U.S. forces could arrive. At 2:25 local time, the attack had already failed. What remained was the part many crews feared even more than the opening moments. The instant when momentum collapsed, when the side that came in fast and confident suddenly realized it was no longer shaping events, only reacting to them. Center contact turning away, outer contact in withdrawal profile, helo maintaining track. Inside CIC, the displays no longer showed a tightening attack pattern. They showed separation, divergence, confusion. The fast attack craft that had entered the night expecting to overwhelm a vulnerable contact were now pulling away in uneven lines. Their wakes told the story before anyone needed to say it. They were running. The captain didn't smile. No one in that room did. On a U.S. Navy warship, the collapse of an attack is not a moment for emotion. It's a moment for confirmation. Confirm no additional shooters. Check for leakers. Keep the helo on the outer arc. The orders came one after another, steady and precise. The destroyer had regained control, but control at sea only exists if it's maintained. The crew understood that even in retreat, those boats could still launch, still pass targeting data, still create an opening for something else farther out. A professional crew never mistakes withdrawal for safety. Above the ship, the MH-60 Seahawk continued its orbit, extending the destroyer's reach deep into the darkness. Its sensors tracked engine heat, surface wakes, and every sudden course change from the withdrawing craft. Every movement was recorded, every signal logged, every failed maneuver captured in real time. That was the final layer of the mistake made that night. They hadn't just targeted the wrong ship. They had targeted a ship capable of turning their failed attack into intelligence. At 2:26, a new report came from the electronic warfare station. Hostile emissions degraded, intermittent only, likely loss of coordination. That's what defeat looks like in modern naval combat. Not dramatic surrender, not loud declarations, just systems falling out of sync. Communication breaking down, units no longer operating as one. The destroyer held the advantage without overextending. She didn't rush after the retreating craft. She didn't waste weapons on a fight that was already collapsing. She stayed on them through sensor coverage, helicopter surveillance, and constant tactical pressure. That restraint wasn't hesitation, it was control. The ship no longer needed to prove anything. It had already done that. Now it needed to make sure the message was clear, unmistakable, undeniable, to those who had tried to strike from the dark. On the bridge, the sea ahead remained black and empty, broken only by instrument glow and faint traces of disturbed water where threats had been stopped minutes earlier. The officer of the deck held the ship steady. Minimal helm input, no sudden moves. The destroyer's posture was almost unsettling in its calm. It did not look like a vessel that had just been targeted in darkness by multiple hostile craft. It looked exactly like what it was, a warship fully in control. Below, damage control reports began to come in. No impact to combat systems, no fire, no flooding, only minor topside debris wash. Each update was acknowledged the same way as every other report that night, calmly, professionally, without celebration. The crew had done its job. That was enough. Ammunition counts were reviewed, intercept sequences logged, sensor data flagged for transfer. Communications remained disciplined. No one needed to say the obvious. It was already clear on every screen. One hostile craft was no longer an effective unit. The others were opening distance at maximum speed, no longer closing, no longer testing, no longer pretending they controlled anything. Their attempt had lasted minutes. The consequences would last far longer. At 2:29, the Seahawk crew sent one more update. Both remaining contacts increasing distance. No turnback observed. Full withdrawal continuing. The tactical action officer glanced at the captain. The captain looked once more at the display, then gave the order that closed the engagement. Maintain shadow until clear. Continue full documentation. Return to controlled transit when the threat picture allows. And that was it. No speeches, no dramatic calls over the net, no raised voices on the bridge, just a ship settling back into disciplined motion after doing exactly what it had been built, trained, and crewed to do. Outside, the dark water erased the last visible traces of the retreating wakes. Above, the helicopter continued its watch. Inside, every system remained active, organized, and ready, just in case the night had one more surprise left. But the pattern had already ended. The men who had come hunting had made their final mistake. They went looking for an easy target in the dark. What they found instead was a warship already alert, already tracking, already prepared to absorb the first move and break the second. They chose the wrong ship.